Hello learners, today we will be talking about the community in nature, and the main objectives of studying this unit is to understand the basic characteristics of a community, appreciate the nature and the importance of interaction among different species and individuals in a living community, learn about the strategies adopted by the living organisms to share and utilize the available resources, realize the importance of the concept of interconnectivity and to develop a holistic perspective of nature, and to formulate the biodiversity friendly tourism norms and practices. We all know that the living organisms, whether it is a plant or an animal, they cannot live in isolation, or they cannot grow alone. They grow together with other members of other species. And this mixture of these species, whether it is a plant-plant mixture of species or a plant-animal or a mixture of plants and animals, this is called a community or association, and they occur in different combinations. All these organisms, they interact at the population and the community level within an ecosystem. We had already discussed about the ecosystem, the biotic and the abiotic components, so we are all aware of what lies inside an ecosystem. So the abiotic factors such as light, air, water, soil affect the survival of these living organisms, whether it is a plant or whether it is an animal. What defines a population, or how do you define a population? The individuals of the same species, they constitute a population. And what constitutes a community? A community is a mixture of species, a population of different species of plants and animals. They inhabit the same region, they share the same resources or of a common area, and such a community or a mixture of these species, whether it may be of the same species or whether it may be of different species, is called a biotic community or a community. And the community change with the change of the environment. The biotic community includes the plants, the animals, as well as the microorganisms. Though tiny or microscopic the microorganisms are, they also contribute to the biotic community. They also interact with the plants as well as the animals. So the biotic community will include the plants, the animals, as well as the microorganisms. And the community, together with its surrounding non-living environment, is called the ecosystem, which we had already discussed earlier. So when we say that the community change with the change in the environment, you can take an example of the hills, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the mountains. As we increase in height, or as we increase in elevation from the plains to the mountains, you will find that there is a change in the community. In the foothills of the Himalayas, they are dominated by the sal, or the sal trees, or Shorea robusta as you call it botanically, and most of the foothills are dominated by a canopy of these large short-leaved trees, and hence they are also known as the sal forests. Now, as we increase in altitude, as the altitude increases, the sal forest is replaced by the needle-leaved trees, that is the pines. The pines replace the sal forest as we increase in altitude. So the pinus, there are different types of species of pinus according to where it is found or where it inhabits. So as there is an increase in the altitude, the community type also changes. Further increase in the elevation, you will find that the region or the forest is inhabited by the oak trees with sclerophyllous leaves. Oak trees replaces the sal forest or the pine forest. Other species also occur along with these trees, but then the dominant ones like in the foothills, you'll find the Shorea robusta or the sal trees. Further increase in altitude, you'll find the pines, and further increase in elevation, you'll find the oak trees. Other species like the rhododendron are also present among these dominant ones, and there are a number of them. Now, what refers or how do you define a habitat? So you need to differentiate between what is a habitat and what is a niche. Habitat refers to the actual physical site occupied by an organism, while niche refers to the physical role an organism plays in the ecosystem. What role does the organism play in the ecosystem is referred to as niche, and the parameters of niche includes food, space, the temperature, the water, and the appropriate conditions for mating. It also includes organisms' behavior and the way in which the behavior changes with different seasons and changing times of the day. So all these parameters are included in a niche, and habitat is the actual site where the organism resides or where the organism is found. Now, some of the parameters, there are certain parameters which are used to describe a community. So how do you know that this community consists of such type of forest, this community consists of such type of trees? So there are certain parameters to describe communities. So the first one is your physiognomy. Physiognomy depicts the external appearance of the vegetation and is a combination of its architectural or biomass structure and the growth forms of its dominant species. The major kinds of growth forms or life forms are based on the height of the tree or the life form, the woodiness, the stem, the leaf form, lifespan, and the deciduousness. The most widely used system of growth forms is the Ronchius life form, which considers the relation of the perinating tissues to the ground surface, which reflects protection from low temperature and divides the plants into 5 major life forms. So these life forms, which are based on the how high or how tall the tree is, woody hai or soft, whether stem has thorns or whether what type of stem it has, the leaf form, the lifespan, and the deciduousness. According to Ronchius life forms, there are 5 major categories of it. And what are these perinating tissues? So these perinating tissues are the buds that contain miniature twigs with leaves that give rise to new twigs during the spring or the rainy season. The seeds then germinate into new seedlings when favorable conditions are available. So the major life forms, 5 major life forms constitute the phanerophytes, the chemiphytes, the hemicryptophytes, the geophytes or the cryptophytes, and the therophytes. So what are these phanerophytes? These are perinating buds which are situated higher up on the aerial shoots. For example, you have the trees, the tall shrubs and the lianas. They may be evergreen or deciduous. In the second type, that is the chemiphytes, these are perinating buds which are situated close to the ground. Then in the hemicryptophytes, the perinating buds are located on the ground surface, protected by the soil or dead plant parts. The shoots, they die under unfavorable conditions. The buds are located on the ground surface, protected by the soil. For example, you have the biennials and the perennial herbs. Even the lichens, the crustose lichens and also the thalloid bryophytes also come under the hemicryptophytes. Then comes cryptophytes or the geophytes. Now the cryptophytes or the geophytes, these are perinating buds which are located below the ground level or submerged in water. Examples are those of the typha, the floating plants, and the root parasites such as orobank. Then you have the therophytes, and these plants, they complete their life cycle from the germination of the seed to the maturation of the seed within favorable season, and they remain dormant during unfavorable conditions in the form of seeds. So these plants, they complete their life cycle from the seed germination to seed maturation only under favorable conditions of the environment or the season. The slime molds and the surface algae, the liverworts and the mosses, and the annual pteridophytes also come under this category. So you can see in this diagram the life forms, the different life forms, the phanerophytes, the chemiphytes, the hemicryptophytes, the cryptophytes and the therophytes. So a community has three basic characteristics. One is productivity, the second is diversity, and the third is resilience. Now, what does productivity mean? Productivity refers to the production of the biomass. How much of biomass is produced by the community? The organisms, from where do the organisms derive their energy? We had already discussed in the previous unit about the producers, the consumers, and then the different trophic levels. So the organisms, from the producers to the consumers, they derive their energy from the lower trophic level. How is the productivity measured? How is the productivity of a community measured? It is measured as a rate of production of biomass, which is dependent on the physical factors like climatic conditions, air, water, light, the type of soil, the landforms or the altitude. We had discussed in the previous unit about the interdependence of the biotic and the abiotic factors. So the productivity, the rate of productivity of the biomass in a community depends on the physical factors, your air, water, light, etc. Now this productivity differs because of all these factors. The average productivity in a terrestrial ecosystem is higher than that of a marine ecosystem, except the shallow coastal waters which are highly productive. Now comes your diversity. Species diversity includes species richness, evenness and diversity. Succession and the response to the climatic change and evolution, they are considered as temporal changes. Now, what does species diversity represent? Species diversity represents the number of species in an area, also called species richness. How many types of species are present in a particular area, and the species curve can be used to compare different communities. You can compare the different communities by calculating the species area curve. Now there are three types of diversity: the alpha diversity, the beta diversity, and the gamma diversity. What does alpha diversity denote? Alpha diversity denotes the diversity within a habitat or within a community, expressed as the number of species per unit area. How many number of species are present in per unit area, the number of species per individual, and the Shannon-Wigner or the Simpson index of diversity. Beta diversity reflects diversity between habitats or between communities and expresses the rate of change in the number of species per unit time in habitat, or the species turnover across an environmental gradient. Heterogeneity in habitat conditions increases the beta diversity. So in beta diversity, it reflects the different species, reflects the diversity in the species between habitats, in one habitat and in another habitat, or between the communities. In gamma diversity, it indicates the regional or the landscape diversity and is a product of the alpha and the beta diversity. The total number of species in the landscape or the geographical region represents the gamma diversity. Now, another important aspect is in a community is the keystone species. So, what do you mean by this keystone species? A keystone species plays a very important role on the community, both directly as well as indirectly. According to Payne 1966 and Parr et al. 1996. Even though its abundance or the biomass in the community is low, this keystone species has a large effect on the community. How does it affect the community? It alters the physical structure. It affects the prey and the host population as predators, parasites, or pathogens, supplying essential services and resources as mutualist, and affecting the energy flow and material resources as producers and consumers. Now, what happens when you remove the predator in a community? So, we have the producer, the consumers, and the consumers, they are the predators which consume the lower level, trophic levels. So, what happens when you remove these predators? Now, Robert Payne, he performed a study on the sea star, that is Picester, which feeds on the mussels, the mollusks, and the crustaceans. So, this sea star, it consumes mussels, mollusks, and crustaceans. And the mussels in turn, they feed on the planktons in the water, and they are directly or they attach itself tightly to the rocks with their threads. Now, other species like the barnacles, the seaweeds, the limpets, the snails, etc., they also compete with the mussels for space on the rocks because their habitat is the rocks, which is occupied by the mussels. And so, the other organisms like the barnacles, the seaweeds, and the snails, they also try to compete with the mussel to occupy a space to live on the rocks. Now, what happens when you remove the predator? The predator is the sea star. So, when you remove the predator consumes on the mussel. Now, when the predator is removed, the mussel population increases. Since there is no predator, so the mussel lives freely, and so their population increases and it spreads over the rocks, thus eliminating other species on the rock surface. It does not allow other organisms to grow on the rock surface. Now, in another case, when the predator was allowed to stay, the number of the mussels decreased, or the population of mussels decreased, or they were removed, thus showing that preying upon mussels increased the species diversity of these sessile organisms. So, the predator plays a very important role in a community. Then we have the edges and the ecotones. What is ecotone and what is this edge effect or the edge species? The ecotone is a narrow transitional zone between two or more than two communities. It contains organisms of both overlapping communities as well as those restricted to the ecotone only. And the edge effect is the tendency of the increased variety and the density of the organisms at the community junction. And the organisms which occur primarily or abundantly or lies in the junction between these communities are called the edge species. The third one is the resilience. Now, what is resilience? The capacity of a community to recover from any kind of natural disturbances is known as resilience. If the community is able to recover from any natural calamities or any natural disturbance, then that is known as resilience. Now, the physical factors of the environment plays a great role in the life forms, like the change in the weather conditions, the temperature, and the wind velocities affect the life forms. Human activities also cause disruption to the communities, where a thick natural vegetation is cleared for construction purposes. When the whole forest area or a whole natural vegetation is cleared for construction purposes, then it becomes too severe for the community to recover back to its normal situation. Then the felling of the trees in a forest may be replaced by the growth of other plants after a period of time. This recovery reflects the community's resilience to attain an equilibrium, that is, the community tries to attain a balance in or a homeostasis in the ecosystem. Homeostasis means the inherent capacity of a system to revert back to the normal state after perturbation. So, from this topic or from this unit, you should be able to describe an area in which an organism resides. What is a group of individuals of a species in an area called? The community and the physical environment surrounding them, the rate of biomass accumulation in a community, the living members of a community, the variety of species in a natural community, and the inherent capacity of the community to overcome any resilience. Thank you.